Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. Aisin-Gioro Puyi was born February 7, 1906, to his father Zaifeng, Prince Chun, and mother Youlan. In December 1908, he was crowned the Emperor of the Qing Dynasty at the age of 2, following the death of the Guangxu Emperor, who died without an heir. Puyi was taken from his family, and only his wet nurse, Wang Lianshou, was allowed to accompany him to the Forbidden City. Puyi spent most of his time with the palace eunuchs, or castrated servants, who did everything from tutoring him to clothing him. The older Puyi became, the more he realized the power he held over these eunuchs. He recounted in his autobiography that he used to shoot them with his air gun and even ordered a eunuch to eat dirt to test his loyalty. Wang Lianshou was the only person who could restrain Puyi. However, when Puyi was 8, the Empress Dowager Longyu, de facto ruler of the Qing Dynasty, expelled Wang from the Forbidden City. Puyi reportedly began crying himself to sleep after her removal. On October 10, 1911, revolutionaries led an armed rebellion against the Qing government and established a provisional government in Nanjing, forcing the Qing leaders to accept abdication terms. Puyi could no longer serve as emperor, and the imperial court lost its power. But they were permitted to stay in the Forbidden City and maintained financially by the Republic. Puyi was not aware of the abdication until the death of Empress Dowager Longyu in 1913. Former Qing Prime Minister Yuan Shikai, who became the President of the Republic of China, visited the Forbidden City to pay his respects. It was then that Puyi understood from Yuan's demeanor that Yuan held more authority than him. In 1915, Yuan declared himself the Emperor of China, but abdicated after only 83 days, following another popular uprising, and later died in June 1916. Following the death of Yuan Shikai, China fragmented into groups led by local military generals, which marked the beginning of the warlord era. In July 1917, warlord Zheng Shuin, a Qing loyalist, restored Puyi to the throne. However, Puyi's second reign quickly ended following 3 small explosions in the Forbidden City after the Republic of China launched an attack as a show of force against Zheng. The Qing army quickly surrendered to Republican forces. In 1919, Sir Reginald Fleming Johnston was appointed Puyi's new tutor. Before Johnston, Puyi had a Confucian education where he only learned Chinese classics. In his autobiography, Puyi stated that he never learned mathematics or science and did not know where Beijing was in China. Johnston not only taught Puyi English, but introduced him to modern technology such as the telephone and cinema. Johnston also recommended Puyi wear spectacles despite opposition from the imperial court and his father. Puyi became obsessed with Western culture, particularly British traditions, and even adopted the name Henry, insisting that his eunuchs address him by that name. In March 1922, the noble court began preparing for Puyi's marriage. He was told to select a woman out of several pictures of daughters from noble Qing aristocratic families to choose as a consort. Puyi initially chose Wen Shou from a bordered yellow banner family, but the noble court rejected that decision because she was only 12 years old. Puyi then decided to marry Wan Rong, the Shuangtung Empress of the Manchu plain white banner Gubulo clan, and made Wen Shou a secondary consort. On October 23, 1924, warlord Feng Yuxiang led a coup in Beijing and took control of the Republic of China. He evicted Puyi and the noble court from the Forbidden City in May, forcing Puyi to flee to Tianjin, where the Japanese took him in. Puyi grew bored in the Japanese concession and began buying lavish items, such as pianos, watches, and radios, as entertainment. During this period, Wan Rong started smoking opium, which grew to become an addiction. She could not complete basic tasks in the palace and eventually grew to resent Puyi. Wen Shou, feeling ever more neglected by Puyi, escaped Tianjin and filed for divorce in 1931, which Puyi accepted. Following Japan's invasion of Manchuria in September 1931, General Doihara Kenji, the perpetrator of the Mukden incident, visited Puyi in Tianjin and proposed establishing him as the Emperor of Manchukuo. Members of the noble court and Wan Rong repeatedly tried to convince Puyi to reject Doihara's proposal. However, Puyi's cousin, Aisin-Gioro Puyi, a Japanese spy better known as Kawashima Yoshiko, convinced him to accept Japan's terms. On March 1, 1932, Puyi was installed as the head of Manchukuo. Although General Doihara had promised Puyi an empire in Manchuria, what awaited him was a puppet state where he exerted very little actual control. The Japanese instituted Puyi as the chief executive and moved him to what was previously an office of the Salt Tax Administration in Chongqing, known as the Salt Tax Palace. Although the Japanese had remodeled the building, it was far smaller than what Doihara had initially promised. The Japanese eventually crowned Puyi as an emperor in 1934. However, instead of being the emperor of a restored Qing Dynasty, he was now the emperor of Manchukuo. Wan Rong's condition grew worse after moving to Manchukuo. By 1938, she was smoking roughly 2 ounces of opium every day, which was nearly a lethal quantity. She also began having secret affairs with palace servants and eventually bore a child as a result. The Japanese, troubled by this news, decided to kill the baby to prevent Puyi from having an illegitimate child as an heir. The baby was euthanized on delivery in 1935. Although Puyi became emperor, he was still a puppet of the Japanese government and held no legitimate authority. His only task was to sign and enforce Japanese policies in Manchukuo. The outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War made it clear to Puyi that the Japanese had no intention of restoring the Qing Dynasty. When the Japanese army conquered Nanjing and Shanghai, the Japanese created new puppet governments instead, rather than adding more territory to Puyi's Manchukuo regime. Later, during the Second World War, despite Japan's defeat at the battles of Midway and the Philippine Sea, Japanese media continued to depict their military as victorious. Thus, Puyi did not realize Japan's military decline until 1944, when he secretly began listening to U.S. broadcasts. On August 9, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchukuo. The Manchukuo and Japanese forces stood no chance against the Soviets, and Puyi attempted an escape to Korea. However, due to the chaos caused by Japanese settlers and soldiers trying to board the train, it failed to reach Korea, forcing Puyi to find a new way to escape Manchuria. On August 15, 1945, Puyi officially abdicated, which marked the end of Manchukuo. Puyi attempted a second escape, this time to Japan, by awaiting aircraft in Mukden. Puyi was forced to choose whom to bring because of limited aircraft seating. Yasunori Yoshioka, attaché to the imperial household, convinced Puyi to leave Wan Rong and the rest of the women in his family because they did not face the danger of arrest by the Soviets. Although Puyi successfully reached Mukden, the Soviets captured him before he could board the escape aircraft. Stalin decided to keep Puyi alive, and although he was a Soviet prisoner, he was still treated with respect and allowed to keep some servants. Chiang Kai-Shek repeatedly demanded the Soviets return Puyi to China to face trial, but Stalin refused on account of the Chinese Communist Party. Puyi's cousin, Kawashima Yoshiko, was captured by the Kuomintang and publicly executed for high treason. Despite being a collaborator of the Japanese government, Puyi was never tried as a war criminal. During the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, Puyi testified as a witness and claimed that he was held by the Japanese against his will. It was clear to the judges that Puyi only said what was needed to protect himself. Edward Baer, the author of The Last Emperor, described Puyi as showing himself to be a consistent, self-assured liar, prepared to go to any lengths to save his skin. Since there was insufficient evidence to convict Puyi, a frustrated judge, Sir William Webb, ordered Puyi out of the room, stating, "Further cross-examination is utterly useless." On December 7, 1949, Mao Zedong's communist forces defeated Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang army and established the People's Republic of China. Mao saw an opportunity of using nobles such as Puyi for propaganda. Puyi was sent to the Fushun war criminals prison in Liaoning for a 10-year sentence. Puyi was treated well compared to other prisoners and under the protection of warden Jin Yuan. However, he was an easy target for other inmates, most of whom were former Japanese, Manchukuo, and Kuomintang officers. It was also the first time Puyi had to live without servants and struggled to accomplish basic tasks such as tying his shoes and brushing his own teeth. As a prisoner, Puyi attended communist discussion groups, lectures, and tours on the atrocities committed in Manchuria. Puyi was eventually released from prison 1 year early due to good behavior. He returned to Beijing in 1959 and a year later found a job as an assistant at the Beijing Botanical Garden. He also often visited the Forbidden City, which had become a museum, and guided tourists around the palace. In 1962, Puyi married Li Shuxian, a Chinese hospital nurse. Unlike his other wives, Puyi and Li seemed to have a loving relationship until his death. Li stated in an interview, "I found Puyi an honest man, a man who desperately needed my love and was ready to give me as much love as he could." 2 years later, Puyi began work as an editor for the literary department of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Puyi continued to demonstrate his loyalty to the Communist Party by praising Mao's government in interviews, articles, and in his autobiography. Finally, on October 17, 1967, at 61 years old, Puyi died in the Beijing Anti-Imperialist Hospital from kidney cancer and heart disease. Puyi's legacy can be viewed through a combination of condemnation and pity. He was China's youngest emperor at the age of 2, served as the emperor of the Qing Dynasty for 4 years, and was the leader of Manchukuo for 13. However, he never possessed any legitimate authority in any of those offices. From a young age, he was groomed to be a puppet ruler and continuously manipulated by different regimes for their benefit. Despite Puyi's unfortunate circumstances, it does not excuse his behavior as an abusive monarch and cowardly leader. He never risked his reputation or ambitions for his own people, but always chose the easier path of self-preservation. The lack of resources also makes it challenging to paint an accurate picture of Puyi's life. Although he published an autobiography in 1964 titled The First Half of My Life, From Emperor to Citizen, it was ghostwritten by Li Wenda, an editor from the Chinese Communist Party, and was based on a confession he wrote under duress in a Chinese prison camp. Many people were skeptical about his loyalty to the Communist Party. He stated in his book, "It is difficult to avoid the impression that Puyi, to prove himself a remolded man, displayed the same craven attitude towards the power holders of the new China that he had shown in Manchukuo towards the Japanese." Baer also interviewed one of Puyi's servants, Big Li, who likewise viewed Puyi's communist conversion with skepticism. Baer states, "Big Li, who had been at Puyi's constant beck and call since 1924, is one of those who believes the new Puyi persona was as calculated as the old. His book, From Emperor to Citizen, doesn't correspond to the truth," he says. Out of self-abasement, Puyi made himself out to be worse and more helpless than he was. Although Puyi may have exaggerated the abuse towards his eunuchs and servants to promote communism, the truth behind his character and actions while in power will remain obscured by history, and his reputation as a failed and controversial puppet leader will most likely remain his most enduring legacy.